my last vlog, a monologue about how long it takes to become a successful composer, you contributed comments which I think are amongst the most fascinating thus far on this vlog. If you haven't seen that monologue, I do recommend at least going and having a look at the comments linked above and below. A couple of themes rose out of those comments that I wanted to address. So I've spoken to two experts in the field. The first being from several successful composers pointing out that they achieved success without all of that social media malarkey. But one could argue, certainly when I was coming up, I'd literally put CVs in the post. It's all about getting to know people. And if you can get people to know you, whether it be through Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube, you will stand. By the nature of humanity, you will simply be at a disadvantage to those who are making those efforts. Dan Keane is a prime example of this, someone who comes across in a deeply intelligent and likeable manner. And this has unearthed all sorts of possibilities for him. Mr. Dan Keane, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Very good indeed. And it looks very familiar where you're working from today.
Yes, I'm in Spitfire HQ, Studio A.
Something that I love doing with fellow composers is sharing what parents refer to as birth stories. But I would just love to know your journey into where you're currently at. I mean, you don't have to go into detail of piano lessons and all that kind of stuff, but, you know, how you broke through, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate to have that kind of educational background. I went to university, went to Royal College of Music, did that kind of conservatoire side of things. But then at the same time, I was quite keen I was starting to watch your videos. I'd started to buy various sample libraries and things, and quickly learned that in order for me to break through as a media composer, which, as you said, might take 10 years, you need to become a good composer's assistant, as that's something that, you know, brings you up through the ranks. So I started thinking about all the different things you'd suggested, being good at kind of arranging, ghostwriting, but creating sample libraries was definitely one of those kind of key things. And I think also it's about this thing of being seen to be seen on the scene, and being able to, you know, show up at seminars, showing up at events and things like that. And I guess there are plenty of people who could practice honing their production chops in their own studios, fantastic creators, but who never went outside of that door, never left their village and shared it with the world. And those people still wouldn't have been successful, and maybe don't deserve to be, because they didn't create the opportunities by which they could, you know, grow and climb up the ladder. So for me, a big part of what has got me to where I am now, and in fact every opportunity since January last year, has come from the YouTube channel. I do owe a lot of that kind of gratitude to you, because I think it's difficult to break that first 1,000 subscribers, even the first 100 subscribers, and being part of a community like this where we can share things, you maybe shout it out, and then we have a means to kind of grow our community. From that point, the stone's already started rolling. It's already started to gain momentum, and now I'm nearly at 10,000 subscribers. But the opportunities that I've gained have come from leaving my village and going online and sharing them with like-minded people.
I get the impression that there is a common perception that there is this democratic online marketplace for media composition. And I'm so often just asked, where do I find the work? And it's like, well, no, you have to develop a kind of almost a brand identity, a presence. And it's not a closed, you know, club. It's all based on relationships.
Absolutely. And I think being able to create that brand is about kind of developing little facets that come off it. So for me, I always identify on YouTube as a composer, producer, and musician. I play on things, I produce for people occasionally. And that, I guess, is part of the sample library creation world as well, being able to make your own sounds that then go onto people's tracks or go into arrangements. And then as a composer, being able to have your own voice. But all of those things kind of tie together in one. So if someone wanted to download a sample library of mine, they know that it's my kind of sonic identity which lends itself to my composition or the way I play my instrument, instruments has maybe fed into the way I compose. And so really the only person for the job has to be that person, because they've got all of the things that tie to that brand. And being able to create a brand is definitely best accentuated by social media. So, YouTube or Instagram, things like that, wherever people find it. I mean, I think a lot of guitarists, share their videos and reels of themselves playing on Instagram. There's a marketplace for that. I don't really dabble in that world too much, but YouTube has definitely been a good one for building connections.
My simple view is simple humanity is that you're drawn to people you feel you know or recognise, the devil you know, so to speak. And I think that something that was incredible is we released a kind of an artist library with Heinbach recently, and it was possibly one of the fastest by unit selling products of Spitfire's entire history. And whilst it's great what he's doing with scientific electronic equipment, and it's great, what he does on his YouTube channel, I have no doubt that it's just this sense of familiarity. And the word family comes from the word familiar. And I think it's just people getting to know you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's also this exchange of value, isn't it? I mean, if you're willing to put yourself in front of a camera, make yourself feel a little bit uncomfortable for a bit to make some tip that's going to help bring somebody else back up or kind of give them a new way of looking at something, in exchange for doing that for free, they might one day be willing to exchange some money for a service that you're providing, rather than a list of people whose names have been removed. So it's just kind of application numbers. And there's no familiarity with that at all.
I know that you're working with a real multitude of people at the moment, and I'm friends with one of them, and I got the impression that he said, I think I can really get along with that guy.
That's another thing that I'm grateful to you for, because it's that connection vouching for somebody else, as well. And again, I don't think you would have vouched for somebody who you didn't know either. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on your ongoing success. I'll let you get on doing some work for Spitfire.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Brilliant.
See you soon.
I think we can all thank Dan for giving us some of his very, very busy time. And I do think it is really worth thinking about how you can represent you. Type in my name to Google. My website appears on the second page. People simply aren't interested in them. They want to get a vibe, a feel. The other theme that rose was that of people who had had massive amount of experience in other fields, had achieved success and wanted to change their direction. I still think it will take you 10 years, with one possible exception: artists. With artists, you're commissioning something that you're familiar with. You're buying into them. And as a consequence, producers and directors are less prescriptive about commonly established workflows. So it's all about putting a team around these artists who can adapt their workflow into the demands of the production. And I spoke to a Mr. Matt Biffer, who's a hugely successful music supervisor who has worked with several big artists on commissioned scores, including stuff like Snatch, The End of the Fucking World, and with me on Fresh Meat. Mr. Matt Biffer, how are you doing, mate?
Good morning, sir. I'm reasonably okay, thank you very much.
And having a very busy year, I hear.
Yeah, at one point we were having or being asked about 2 shows a week, basically.
So your feet are firmly kind of planted in two ends of the industry, the recording industry and the TV and film music industry. Yeah. You've also been involved in scores where they commission a recording artist. And I have a lot of people approaching me from that side of the fence going, I want to get into media composition. I would say being able to write to picture is relatively easy, but there's other parts of the process that I know recording artists can sometimes struggle with. What's been your experience?
I've been lucky in that the people that I've worked with thus far have thoroughly understood the sort of the sort of golden rules of media composition, which is that, it ain't you. You are part of the overall storytelling team. As a very quick aside, I did a documentary years ago called Goth Cruise. And we wanted to do like a sort of almost like music box version of a really famous goth song, and a member of the band found out that we were doing it and said, look, if you're doing this is great, but I'm the only one that should be doing it. So anyway, he had a go at it, and it wasn't quite right, and the director sent him a really considered, polite email explaining why it wasn't quite working. And this dude emailed me and said, I feel like one of my children is being molested. If you're going to pursue this, then I suggest you get some hack to do it and leave me out of it, which was kind of like, breaking the golden rule of media composition, really, I think, it's the same thing with finding songs, I mean, there's stuff goes into stuff that I do sometimes that I violently disagree with, and sort of feel actually reasonably embarrassed that maybe some of it's in. I'm not the one that is, sort of like making these decisions. It's a team thing, isn't it? So to answer your question after that massive digression, I have been lucky. But I do think that that it has become easier for artists to sort of, I always thought of it as a bit like a walled city, composing to picture.
Yeah.
Like it's really difficult to get in, and then once you're in, it's quite easy to kind of move about and all that kind of stuff. The thing about, I mean, I think with Johnny Greenwood is the one that sort of really kind of brought this to the fore, because there was a time when, once he started to get involved in writing, sort of film scores and stuff like that, every meeting you had about a film would be, well, is Johnny Greenwood available?
Right.
I always think the thing that you need with an artist, whoever that might be, who is doing this for the first time, you have to have a music editor. And the reason for that is because you need the grown-ups in the room who deal with things like notes, subsequent amendments, deadlines, because, I mean, when I worked on the end of the fucking world, for example, with Graham Coxon, who is compulsively creative, and Coxon Coxon would send like 7 or 8 pieces of music a day, and they were all about 8 minutes long, because he just couldn't stop, right?
Brilliant.
And all the stems and all this kind of stuff, Graham is like sort of like, what day is it? Do we have a meeting? What was that email about? And I don't, somebody sort of saying something about this particular cue, and he has a completely different language. He doesn't even talk about like guitars, having mids or, stuff like that. He sort of talks, guitars are like bubbly, bubbly, or sort of like, he uses warm a lot and all that. Warm, I get, that's just like more bass, basically. But bubbly, as I understand it, is sort of like that sort of edge of breakup, amp slightly distorting thing.
Right.
The thing about artists is, if you're in a band or whatever, it's those 4 people and maybe the manager and the A&R guy that are sort of like weighing in on whether something's good or not. With a Netflix show, you've got obviously the director, you've got, the sort of day-to-day producer, you've got the execs and Netflix themselves, who are all sort of weighing in and, sometimes violently disagreeing on what's right and what's wrong and all this kind of stuff. And then this poor person's stuck in the middle with no experience. Now, for Hans Zimmer or somebody like that, or yourself, like you're used to this galaxy of, pardon my language, total shit fighting, right?
because of modern technology, I think media composers have kind of made it more difficult for themselves by being very acquiescent and being able to change things last minute. Recalls are not the disaster they used to be, full mix recalls and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it makes it harder for artists coming into this world where you are really expected. I think it's really good what you said, to be part of the storytelling team. I know of someone who's having difficulty with an artist on a score at the moment. And they explain to them, listen, it's basically, you have to imagine that there's a new frontman in your band and you're in the backing band.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the new frontman, can either be the most egotistical, passive-aggressive asshole you've ever met, but who just has the most amazing voice. Do you know what I mean? And that's the reason you're in the band with them, or could just be totally shambolic and incoherent and totally doesn't understand. It's so subjective, isn't it? I even now, sort of 25 years in, and I'm sure you're the same. Sometimes people make a comment about a piece of music or why something works or something like that, or doesn't work, and you're like, I literally have no fucking clue what you are going on about.
Do you remember that? I won't say the name of the production, but it was set in the Alps. And the producer hated reverb and just kept on getting us to pull the reverb out. And we booked a really small studio because it wouldn't have any reverb. And then at the mix, she was saying less reverb. And she had this totally arid score. It was like it was like drenched in talcum powder. It just sounded like ash. And it really didn't fit the Alps, which are kind of reverby. Let's face it, yodeling. Yeah. And then finally on the dubbing stage, she goes, Christian, I can still hear reverb. And she was referring to a tremolando guitar.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It is baffling sometimes. And I think, actually, I'm doing something right now. It's another show with a really young band. And they're basically writing a lot of stuff up front. And, they're doing really well, but they sort of had this run of doing really well, and then they did something that the directors was like, this is good and we can use it, but it's not what I had in mind for this particular job.
Yeah,
in this case, it was like sort of like broken down into sort of like a super scary job, action job, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, this isn't super scary. And I know that kind of knocked them back a bit.
I've improved over the years, and I actually enjoy them now because they're like little puzzles. I'm also very lucky to only work with people I like these days because of the total, arse wipes that I've had to put up with. But I think if you go into it, again, my friend who's doing their first TV show at the moment, I said, if you go into it knowing it's like Death and Taxes, recuts and revisions it is part of the job. It's like saying, I like being a bin man, but I hate smelly bins. It's like, well, there are definitely going to be smelly bins.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, again, going back to the end of the fucking world, there was one, in season 2, there was one episode which was pretty much all score. We were very song heavy on that show, with the exception of this one particular episode, which we always knew was going to be very scory. And Graham wrote quite a lot of stuff for it. And again, it was a very, very dense sort of 8-minute. It was like Slint, basically, sort of like very atonal guitar. It was amazing to listen to the mix in terms of like how, just to get nerdy, but how you EQ different guitars to just sit in the thing. Masterclass,
Right.
Me and the music editor sort of I spent quite a lot of time sort of crafting this episode, and then Charlie, the writer, came and saw it, and she was just like, "Oh, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I just don't like any of it, you know." And it's sort of like it's not hitting with the comedy, and it's not, you know, blah 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 blah. And so, but Charlie is lovely, and she's also really, she gives really intelligent notes that you can actually understand. And then very lovelily, the next day she actually said, "Actually, I'm sorry, I'm a bit hormonal, and also I kind of don't hate it as much as I thought I hated it." And actually we were able to meet in the middle and stuff like that. But in terms of sort of like what that meant for Graham, I think he just had to send a drum part, which he had a little V drum, you know, sort of drum kit in, and he just literally played some stuff. And I think Sam, the music editor, was putting like some Roland Space Echo, sort of very staccato sort of delay, you know, repeats on it. You know, your heart kind of sinks, doesn't it, when you sort of get that thing of like, oh, I don't like it.
Well, often the best piece of music, it's a little bit like the picture edit, or the scene that they cut will often be the best scene, but it just doesn't help with the story arc. And I think that the thing to do is just, if something gets passed off, you just put it into a little folder for library music. Or indeed, I got fired off an entire movie and used most of the cues that I'd written for that movie on the next movie further down the line.
Really?
So these things never go to waste. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Matt, thank you so much for talking to me about this today. It's absolutely fascinating.
Pleasure.
So regardless of how successful you've been in another field, unless you're an artist, I would still argue it'll take you 10 years, because it's not about what you can do, it's about what you have done. And that's what you need to gather over that period in order to convince producers that you're a safe set of hands in which to put the jeopardy of the production. Thanks, as always, for watching. Do subscribe if you haven't done already, and ding that bell to be notified the next time I put a video up. I've got some really, really exciting stuff coming up, some great kind of orchestrally stuff, and I'm currently filming a piano book highlights mashed up with a Modular Mondays featuring a module called Spanky. One of those for Matt and Dan. See you next time.